Hello and welcome to the Alphagenix Podcast, where we discuss all things men's health and testosterone, but also other biohacking times and tricks. So I'm Dr. Max Draper, lead clinician at Alphagenix, and today I'm joined by Forrest Smith, the CEO and co-founder at Clincian Labs. Welcome, Forrest. Pleasure to
Thank you,
have you
Dr.
on.
Max. Super excited to talk to you today. I love what you guys are doing over there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, we just chatted before offline, and certainly you're in an area of the world of medicine, which is certainly expanding, but also showing some really exciting promise. Tell everybody what Clincian is about and how you got into this as well.
I love it. I'll start off the same way we start off all of our all hands meetings and just tell you what our mission is as a company and how that's led us into the kind of products that we develop. But our mission is to increase the quality of life for the largest number of people we can in the most substantial and measurable way we can. And what that's brought us to from a product standpoint is laser therapy. And the reason for that is when we started developing our products, 3 to 4 years ago, um, the the technology and the medical trials, over 6,000 medical trials researching red light therapy and really showing unequivocal, awesome responses from a physiological standpoint. And I can dive in a little bit more on what that means and what we trigger and how that signaling kind of comes out from a biohacker result standpoint. But suffice to say that there was amazing kind of cardiovascular recovery, pain and inflammation impacts. But what we saw at the time was that what drives these outcomes from a medical and recovery standpoint is dosing. How do you get the right photons into the right photoacceptors in the body? And the only people who were doing really good jobs of that in developing their products were clinical devices that started around $30,000. And so it really wasn't something that people could use to replace their existing pharmaceutical solutions like NSAIDs and opiates, which both have really meaningful downsides and side effects from a health and wellness standpoint. And so our goal was to reduce the friction points for people to adopt a technology that can offer them a meaningful solution for not just the pain and inflammation they might be suffering on a daily basis, but also just the underlying causes for this. And so, we interact with and treat osteoarthritis and a number of different joint conditions very effectively, and really help a lot of people get out of pain and inflammation and back into movement. And it's been a really kind of I think we've over the last 2 years, as of 2 weeks from now, we've shipped over 35,000 products worldwide, and we just have an awesome community that's built around delivering results for people and helping them have alternatives and be empowered to get back into movement, where a lot of things like chronic osteoarthritis and chronic inflammation in the body can really be degenerative and take a long-term effect. There's not really great gold standard solutions for these from a pharmaceutical standpoint that solve the underlying issues, and that's where we come in, is really wanting to impact our users and our patients' lives in a meaningful way around this.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's incredible you say, because there is a lot of research in this area to show the benefits, but like you mentioned before, products like yours were, coming along and being designed, it's getting the average person to have access to this sort of treatment, isn't it? It's kind of like that was a really big problem until, people like your work, where you could actually supply it on a large scale to the average person, rather than someone who's attending this specialized clinic or this specialized hospital that has access to it. So was that the inspiration behind it? Was, like you said, just being able to provide it to the majority of people rather than just these isolated areas of medicine?
Absolutely. And really what we found is that again, it comes back to the dosing. The dosing is so key for the outcomes, and we want to be able to provide these outcomes. That's our core mission as a company. It's not really to grow to $1 billion company. It's to impact people's quality of life. And when you see a clinician, we actually work with a number of clinicians now to be able to use the devices in clinic. But one of the things that helps them the most is oftentimes when you see a chiropractor or a PT, they're giving rehab work to their patients, and they'll send somebody home with this. And if you have osteoarthritis of the knee, as an example, or if you have inflammation in your different joints, one of the things that can happen with this, and they see a drop off in the maintenance of the rehab programs because of it, is you can trigger more acute inflammation in the area. And that causes pain, and people stop doing their rehab work because it hurts too much. And so, what we found in our partnerships with medical professionals is they're super excited about this because people can now go home and stay on top of these programs. So you see, our older users, a lot of them have started down this spiral of not even being able to walk as far as they were, 10 years ago. And it's kind of a boiling the frog type analogy where you don't notice this. You just, your knee hurts, and so you're 65 years old, you got osteoarthritis, and your knee hurts, and by the time you're 70, you're walking 1/10 as much as you were when you were 65. And when you do that, you lose muscle mass. You become more susceptible to falls. You start experiencing depression and anxiety more because you're not moving and exercising enough. And being able to help people get back into that movement has been so powerful. And the medical professionals, you can see them, like they're excited to see their patients have this opportunity to go extend out how far they're walking, extend out how they're training, how they're doing their rehab, and have a tool to be able to limit and reduce that inflammation and pain and stay in the program and have much better long-term results. So it's been a combination of the clinical side, but also democratizing the technology to let people access this directly.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's about, like you're saying now, it's so significant because I always liken things to low testosterone and breaking the cycle that can cause, increasing body fat, loss of muscle, more inflammation, that reduces testosterone further. But like you said, with a lot of conditions like arthritis, is the pain, the limited movement, and then it just gradually gets worse because people will do less. They're more adverse to going for longer walks because they end up getting a stiffer joint, a more painful joint. But conversely, that worsens the muscle loss, that worsens the arthritis as well because the joint stability is lost. It's kind of like what you're talking about there is spot on, breaking that vicious cycle and actually maybe going backwards, rolling it back to more of a positive cycle. How did you sort of get into this area yourself? Because when we're talking offline, you've got an interesting history through China and living and being involved in other forms of lighting and things, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I had a LED lighting and controls business that we built. I lived in China for almost 20 years, and I speak, read, write fluent Chinese, and I ran a couple of my businesses in Chinese. And really, what we were doing at the time was making things happen from a hardware standpoint, from an innovation standpoint, that shouldn't be able to. And we applied that to LEDs starting in the kind of mid 2000s, before it was really adopted on a large scale. And we really try to address, again, kind of like you can see from Kenny on our mission now, is we try to address large systemic issues. And in this case, it was reducing electrical usage, to reduce specifically the cost for rolling out different types of um, more green energy production. So, as an example, if you want to put up, solar cells at a huge building, one of the things you can do to reduce the cost of that is to reduce your overhead from a lighting standpoint. And so if you can reduce the lighting electrical load by 80%, the photovoltaic actually makes a lot more sense in a number of different areas. And so we had a great time with that. We sold it to the second largest lighting company in the world, but it also gave me a background in solid state lighting. So I really kind of have been through thousands of laser and LED fabrication factories, all the way down through assembly factories. And I got to my mid 30s and had a bit of an epiphany. And I think potentially similar to some of your clients, I got to my mid 30s. I saw what should have been, and I didn't get measured for it at the time because I don't think there was really the awareness of the issue. But I got to my mid 30s. I was 50 pounds overweight, unhappy, and starting down this spiral that you described earlier with low T. And I took a step back and had been reasonably commercially successful with my businesses, but like if it's destroying your body and your confidence and your health, then what are you really committing into? And so really kind of turned a corner at that point and said, look, this is something where what can we do to not just help me? I had old MCL injuries and meniscus injuries from grappling when I was younger, having played sports my entire life, and really just wanted to make a commitment in to be able to do something that helped health and wellness for every stakeholder that was interacting with us. Whether it's our team members, our patients, our medical doctors that we interact with, we've got a commitment to everyone to improve the outcomes that they're able to provide from a health standpoint, really based on kind of that epiphany of how important health and wellness is, that hit both my partner and I in our kind of mid to late 30s.
Yeah, that's sort of a quite a classic age, isn't it? That mid to late 30s point where you've you've almost done like you were doing, building up a business or building up your career. You've been through, either further education, then you've got on the career ladder, you've tried to progress up, and then you stop for a second and say, hold on, I've neglected my actual underlying health here. And it just creeps up on you. Yeah, you see that so often, don't you? I mean, it's sort of I was sort of similar when I hit my mid-30s. I thought, hold on a minute, I probably need to shed a little bit of weight here and get a bit more active and get a bit more movement back in. Yeah, yeah.
No, I love it, and I think it's one of the nice things that you notice about that, though, is that once you've gotten to that point of life, you also typically have some level of more situational awareness as to what you can do to be able to do that. And I think one of the downsides, you have less responsiveness from a physiological adaptation standpoint for training than you do when you're say 20, but you have more awareness of the kind of time and energy it takes to be able to move the needle that way. And I think committing to what I committed to at that point in time was every 10 years to have better performance numbers. And so,
Mhm.
that can be, high intensity numbers, lifting numbers, cardiovascular numbers. And we started tracking, kind of the old Peter Drucker thing of what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed gets done. And when you start measuring what your aerobic and anaerobic throughput is, and then seeing where you are, a 1% change every day doesn't cost you a ton to go do from a time and engagement standpoint, and can really move the needle for you powerfully over time. And when you start taking that out to decades of what that 1% days really means, it gets you in a much more powerful and empowered place to go make changes yourself.
Yeah, and that's a good commitment to do 10 years, because I think what a lot of people do is they set short-term goals, and sometimes they're unrealistic. Like you said about how the body does adapt a bit more slowly as you're older, especially compared to like your late teens or early 20s. So setting those long-term goals, well, keeps you targeted as well, but it also makes it more realistic almost potentially, because it does take time for things to adapt. But how did you stumble yourself across the red light sort of laser therapy type stuff? Was that through your own your own more health awareness state? Was it because there is stuff out there online, isn't it? It's certainly becoming more well known about than perhaps it was 5-10 years ago, being used or mentioned on social media and things, which often gets people a little bit more interested in the area. How did you yourself stumble across this area?
It's a great question. Actually, my mother is an early adopter for a number of different technologies, and oftentimes she'll bring it to me. I've lived in the technology space for so long that she'll bring it to me, and I also spend a lot of time in the medical literature from a research standpoint. So she brings me occasionally these different treatment modalities, and she brought it from a skin standpoint. So
Yeah.
understanding that this was potentially a snake oil type treatment modality, I dove into it. And, oftentimes, again, I'd say that's probably 8 out of 10 of those technologies that are new to market would be in that kind of snake oil category. And so I was leaning towards trying to disprove this, but the more I tried to disprove it through the medical literature, the more I saw the increases in type 2 collagen production, the increases in fibroblasts, et cetera. And so that was kind of the skin level and wound healing studies. But as I started digging into those, you can kind of balloon out from a research standpoint, and came across a number of different upstream mechanisms relative to what the photoacceptors are and what kind of signaling pathways we've actually, as a medical and research community, kind of validated from a research standpoint. And the more I dug into it, the more research had validated these different mechanisms. And the interesting piece of it is that, at the time, a lot of these mechanisms had been validated, but a lot of the downstream impacts from a health and wellness standpoint hadn't really come to light yet. And it's a very gratifying thing, particularly with our medical team, to be able to research this. And you see research on a daily basis, and I think somewhere near 7,000 medical trials on photobiomodulation, which is the kind of blanket term, low-level laser therapy. There's a number of different terms for it, red light therapy, etc. But nearly 7,000 papers on this, and there's a number of different kind of meta-analyses in here. And what you see out of these when you take the time to dive into those is these forest plots that really show that when the dosing is correct, there's a huge needle move on a number of different things. But again, stem cell proliferation, chondroblast and fibroblast proliferation, so remodeling soft tissue and skin, wound healing at an increased rate, increased production of ATP from the mitochondrial retrograde signaling. It's there's a laundry list of things that this impacts. And one of the things that we've spent a lot of time doing internally as a team is trying to understand let's start, because I think one of the things we see from a commercial product standpoint is how can we get red light on people? And so we see these, what we consider kind of first generation products like red light panels, where it's a very interesting product to get the concept in front of people, but the dosing model for these, because of the broad emission pattern, the 120-degree emission pattern from LEDs, and the fact that you have this is not emitted at skin level, it's extremely hard to dose internal tissue. So we found in our research around this that this really just needs a better tissue modeling. So how does light distribute? How does light propagate through tissue? And so we've gone back and internally built really powerful Monte Carlo models around the light distribution. And we know what photoacceptors we're triggering and we're targeting. We know at what order of magnitude they exist, and then at what level of depth in the tissue they exist. So we've spent tens of thousands of hours now with our CTO is a PhD physicist. We've got our head of product design is a PhD mathematician. We've got some very strong minds coming in, both internally and externally, with the labs we work with from Harvard and other universities for research in the space, coming together around how are we showing the light propagation through to these photoacceptors in the way that's going to trigger the adaptation in the most effective way. And then instead of just sitting that up in an ivory tower and saying, here's what our model says, we've also found some very good ways with optical sensors to be able to measure different biometrics that validate these. And they didn't necessarily validate 100%, but if we say, here's what we're expecting, from a serum nitric oxide as an example, and then here's what we're finding, then it helps us close the gap between what our kind of ivory tower math says it should be, and then what's actually happening in physiology. And after a number of cycles, I think we are the gold standard kind of world-class dosing model for outcomes. So it's been a lot of work to get to it, but we're not here to really sell products. We're here to solve problems, and that's our commitment and mission as a company. And so we really use that as our North Star to make decisions around which direction to go, both from a research standpoint and from a product development standpoint.
Yeah, so interesting about the dosing dependent response in terms of, is there, I mean, that can be the issue in this space, isn't it? You like you rightly said, you started with the point of view of this is nonsense and I'm going to disprove it, which I think is a really good place to start off from, because like you said, so much stuff out there. You go on Instagram and you get told this is the product you're missing out of your life. It's this supplement is going to sort everything out and you're going to feel like Superman and you're going to be, running a 10K tomorrow based on taking this supplement. So it's quite a nice place to start off from a point of view of pessimism, that you're going to try and actually disprove it. And then you actually end up thinking like, oh, actually, you might be onto something here. But also the other thing as well about that dose dependence, is it then that some of the studies, and you can even tell from your team, is that some of the studies with less impressive results, let's say, is that because there's an issue with the dosing? Is in it's underdose, let's say, and then you said there's almost like a threshold when you get beyond that, then you do see consistent changes with the collagen and everything like that. And was this originally, when I looked into this previously, it's a lot of this therapy was it originally all around skin and wound healing? Was that the original sort of area where it kind of got into medicine in a sense?
I think that's the original area. It's a very big market, kind of wound healing, and particularly diabetic wound healing has been a very big application for this. Because it's a big impact from a metabolic standpoint. Again, that the mitochondrial retrograde signaling and the impacts on oxidative stress are really powerful. But I think one of the main reasons that there's so much literature and documentation on and research on skin is because skincare is a huge market, and so the
Yeah.
dollars kind of pulled it in for this, and it's been we've noticed this as a research team. There's skincare, erectile dysfunction. There's a number of very like big market hot topic things that drive a lot of research, but which is great for those topics. But in some cases, it's unfortunate from uh, an application standpoint, because as an example, we're going to be launching a product early next year for what started off as an endometriosis product. We had our device, and we stay in very like, because our mission is to deliver these results to our community and to our users. We stay in very close contact with our users, and we started getting back in anecdotal stories around endometriosis changes. And when it's anecdotal, it's N of one, and you kind of have to kind of just put it to the side a little bit until you've got 10 or 20 of these. And what we were seeing was these claims of, hey, I know this device impacts inflammation. My wife has endometriosis. I told her to use it, and she went from an 8 out of 10 to a 0 out of 10 in 30 minutes. And so when you hear that a number of times, yeah, our research and engineering teams skew male, and it's not a space that we had kind of been in. We had been researching things like testosterone improvements and recovery from sports and things like this, because it's an interest for us. And endometriosis just wasn't on our radar. But as soon as we start looking into this, we find that the underlying mechanisms and the outcomes that we can deliver in that space are extremely powerful. There's higher mitochondrial density in ovarian and uterine tissue than almost anywhere in the body, and we interact with that quite well. And we also we reduce inflammation, and particularly chronic inflammation, very, very effectively. And when you can do that, the outcomes that people have from a pain, it's anything that's an inflammation driven pain point, we deal with extremely, extremely effectively. So, but oddly enough, this space of endometriosis and fertility and dysmenorrhea and perimenopause and menopause just hadn't been. There's so many more dollars going towards erectile dysfunction and skin than there were to this. Although it's a very, I mean, this is a very prevalent problem. Endometriosis itself, around 12% of the female population experiences this, and about half of those are completely put out of action by the level of pain they experience with it. So being able to deliver this, there's no good pharmaceutical solution for it. And somehow the kind of research space had skirted kind of launching a product into this direction, just because it's not as big a market as skincare and erectile dysfunction. So it's interesting to see that. But yeah, I think your point about the skepticism has been super helpful, because it also gives us an empathy with people who come in and say, how is it you can claim to treat so many different pathologies with one device? And I think one of the points that we try to make with this is that it's not necessarily that we're treating all of these different pathologies so effectively. We're treating inflammation, and inflammation is at the foundation of so many pathologies that it almost gets to the point where I really have an empathy for people who come in and say, how is this not snake oil? You're claiming a number of different things here, but all of these tie back so heavily to inflammation that it really is a range of things that we can, by treating this one mechanistic mediating factor of inflammation, go back and help in a meaningful way with.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, a couple of words you said there was just strikes the interest for me, because being in this world of men's health, low testosterone, fertility, all of these things, inflammation, oxidative stress, it's kind of like the underlying issue for so many of these conditions. And like you said, that extends into women's health issues, it extends to chronic disease, joint issues. And that's why you say if you're tackling that sort of inflammatory or oxidative stresses, then that will tie across into other pathological areas, because it's almost like the same as saying, these medications that increase nitric oxide, how come they're used for erectile dysfunction, but they're also potentially good for your blood vessels and your heart? And it's because nitric oxide is important for multiple areas of health. So well, you could even say inflammation reduces nitric oxide. So there's all of these tie-ins whenever it becomes inflammatory, and like this inflammatory cascades as well. If you can try and reverse that or reduce it down, then you're going to get results all over, essentially, really, aren't you? Yeah.
That's exactly it. And even in strange places where we don't expect it. Like one of the things that we've seen with this is when you can. So there was an NFL study observational study on 3,500 players, and it's a very interesting and very telling one as to how powerfully negative the impact of inflammation is on your body. So this study showed that essentially out of 3,500 players, half had an ACL tear, rehab that gone back to playing, and then half had not. And the half that had a something like 70% increased mortality rate based on cardiovascular disease. So severe cardiovascular events, infarctions, and et cetera. And so in kind of peeling that back, we started kind of looking at different athletes who had these type of injuries to see what else we could flag as different kind of mediating factors to that. And so what we found is two things. One is that inflammation doesn't stay local to the knee tissue, and so even after you rehabbed it, that tissue that's had that traumatic damage continues to generate ongoing inflammation. And there's two ways that we found that presenting. One is the regional delivery of oxygen and blood. And so we measure this with infrared cameras. So if you see this, even after someone's gone through all their rehab, 2 to 3 years later, if you measure the quad muscles over the knee that's been traumatically damaged, or that's had the ACL tear and the surgery, et cetera, it's about 1.5 to 2 degrees colder than the healthy leg. And what that comes down to is that cardiovascular system, that cardiopulmonary system, is less effective because it's been impacted by the inflammation. And the other piece of that is coming back, and we've also been trying to look at like what mediates this from a general, or so you got local, regional, that kind of makes sense, but what's happening systemically or generally in the body that's kind of mediating these really higher and kind of unequivocal changes from a general cardiovascular health standpoint. And what we found is the decrease in cardiovascular endothelial shear strength of this tissue drops off dramatically. And I think one of the things that we've seen with that is not only does the inflammation impact that, but the laser therapy by releasing. So one of the things that we interact with as a molecule in the body with our infrared lasers is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin's got 4 binding sites that are competitive for oxygen and nitric oxide. When you can dump nitric oxide into the blood, you see the dilation of the blood vessels, and it also, by doing this, trains the cardiovascular endothelial tissue to regain some of that shear strength that it loses by losing the kind of reactivity to. If you do this chronically, if you do the treatment chronically for about 6 weeks, we see the regional temperatures level out, and we see that shear strength level out as well. And so what that's doing is really just training by the kind of signaling of, and essentially we were releasing S-nitrous thiol back into the bloodstream, and then having that be uptaken by the endothelial tissue, and the endothelial tissue trains into how to effectively use this again from a dilation standpoint. And so it regains that shear strength, which is it's really surprising that you can see, like, again, like downstream effects from a cardiovascular standpoint. Who thinks that I tore my ACL and now I'm going to die of a heart attack? But your increased rate of high double percentages in, not 100%, you're not doubling it, but high double percentages kind of risk factor is crazy. For us, it was one of those kind of aha moments of how bad inflammation is as a scourge in your body from a systemic standpoint.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are referring to even things like, and I was going to ask you about cognition and cognitive effects. Has there been ever looking at sort of brain positives? Because obviously there's the element of, because you mentioned about NFL players, sportsmen who have recurrent brain injuries. There's concepts of inflammatory cascades, but also getting into a vicious cycle with inflammation, neurologically speaking, but also just potentially dementia, a lot of dementia being linked to inflammation and things. Has that ever been something that people have looked at in this area of therapy, or is it something that by proxy we would suspect benefit, I guess? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, no, we definitely see improved cognitive benefits for certain types of dementia. So Parkinson's, I know Parkinson's is an interesting one because what we're seeing with Parkinson's is there's a group out of Australia that does great work on this, treating the gut, and it's a Parkinson's. You have a part of your brain called the substantia nigra that generates a lot of dopamine, a lot of neurotransmitters in your brain that is impaired. And when you're not even when you're treating it also helps treating transcranially. But if you're treating your gut, you also see improvements in the dopamine production in your brain, and those aren't crossing the blood-brain barrier because you do actually produce these neurotransmitters in your gut as well. But you're signaling to your brain from your gut for additional production for these. And so we've seen a number of studies on improvements for Parkinson's and Lewy body syndrome in specific. And we're also seeing, we're actually doing we're going to be launching a brain product next year. We're doing internal research and grant applications relative to Alzheimer's. And I think the Alzheimer's is an interesting one because we've seen so many, there's a kind of proteins and plaques theory of Alzheimer's. And there's been a number of different pharmaceuticals that have treated proteins and plaques in the brain and reduced these without any benefit from a cognitive repair standpoint. And one of the things that our team internally believe is we have a very powerful impact on microvasculature and kind of that cardiopulmonary delivery system. And we believe, and we're seeing more and more supportive data for this, although it's still early, it's still a hypothesis, but this kind of microvasculature hypothesis of Alzheimer's is that essentially these plaques are there and it's a marker, but it's kind of a downstream marker and less directly tied and not mediating these kind of mental and neurological and cognitive impairments, where the cardiovascular piece is, and that we can use this from an early detection and diagnostic standpoint, but that we can also treat it from a transcranial treatment standpoint. And so this is one of the underpinning hypotheses as to why this transcranial laser therapy is improving people's blood delivery and cognitive outcomes from a neurological standpoint.
Yes, it's like we were saying before about inflammation seemingly being the underlying mechanism for a lot of these disease processes. I think I've heard people refer to dementia as type 3 diabetes because it's all linked with the vascular system being prolonged, for a prolonged period being suboptimal or damaged, and then you get, like you said, the plaques being actually a result of that rather than the plaques being the initiator of the problem. How do people, if people are watching this and they think, oh my God, this sounds awesome, how does someone get a device and use it? Is there sort of like you're talking about dosing before, as in dosing of actually getting it close enough to the skin or potentially delivering enough daily? How does it all work? Tell us a little bit about that, Forrest, how someone would look to be like, I want one of these, so I'm going to get in touch with Clincian and get involved in it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you can find us at Clincian, KINEON.io, and we have a lot of our research and blogs up there. And I think we also have access to one of the databases that our team contributes to, which is an international group that's pulling together and keeping key criteria out of over 6,000 different medical research papers in this space right now. So if you want to go do your own research, come to our site, download these, look into it yourself. We really encourage people to kind of make themselves as educated as possible. Myself and my partner, we're on calls with our users every week. We're here to deliver a solution, and if people aren't getting the solution, it means we have failed. So we put our Calendlies out there to make sure that people have both the device and then also an understanding and a protocol as to how to use it. And we try to tell them also that this is this is an awesome piece to have in your toolkit because reducing inflammation is a really powerful tool. But if you're not using this to go move more, if you're not changing your diet around these things, there's a number of different tools that you can stack. And you really should look at this more as a comprehensive solution than just say, hey, this is a magic pill, let's go turn it on. But really, long-term reducing inflammation is such a powerful tool that it's going to help you. But yeah, if people want to follow us, we're on Clincian_labs on Instagram. Again, we try to do as much as we can from webinars and educational pieces. So if you're on our website, you'll see different links to webinars and really trying to get people to ask these skeptical questions. There's a lot of things out there that are really more commercially focused than results focused, and we don't like to bash anyone else's product. These tools can help people. And it would be great if they were all dosed properly and had the correct research behind them. But we're happy to kind of provide access to any piece of this that from a research and background standpoint to allow people to educate themselves as much as possible, because I think that's part of the empowerment is if you can reduce your inflammation, if you can take additional movement on because of that, the outcomes you see both from a health standpoint but also from a mental health standpoint are incredible and extremely well documented.
Yeah, lovely. I like that as well that you said about how it's one part and it can be life-changing to get you back on a positive trajectory, but you've still got to look at diet, exercise and things like that. It's not that magic pill that fixes everything. Like we're all looking for that, but it's about the whole combination. But hopefully it helps you be able to get back on track with regards to getting out more, moving more, all of the other aspects of general health that you've got to tick off majority of the time. Yeah,
that's exactly it. And also just coming on to talk to, and I think you guys will find the same thing is coming on to talk to people who are doing similar things that you guys are doing as well. Is there's as we age, there are changes from our hormones and changes from our tissue levels that we have better and better tool sets to be able to introduce interventions for at the individual level, and being able to educate people and support them for that is such a powerful place to be. And I think you guys are doing some very exciting stuff in the same space as well.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying. Yeah, that's why it's nice to speak to like-minded people who are trying to get the word out there on different modalities of treatment when combined with a holistic approach, like you say. So if I was to get one of these, would it be fair to say that depending on my ailment, the sort of duration of treatment, the frequency of treatment would vary from individual to individual depending on what issue they had? Is that fair to say?
It is. I think just from a general kind of usage protocol we find, though, is using it on joints and soft tissue, particularly when it's a repetitive stress injury. And we've seen repetitive stress injuries from kind of tennis and golf elbow to like the U.S. Olympic weightlifting team are using our devices. And
Nice.
yeah, one of the nice things about that though is like if you think about Olympic weightlifting or tennis or golf, it's the repetitive stress on the joint that really causes a lot of that inflammation and the soft tissue remodeling that we can help with on improving kind of again collagen proliferation, including improving these chondroblasts, which is the fast-growing cells that kind of generate cartilage. You see a lot of this is reducing inflammation and stopping the degradation, but there's also benefits that are longer term, kind of month scale improvements from a tissue remodeling standpoint. And so when people have these repetitive stress injuries, they see amazing results for it. And what that takes is about 15 minutes a day. And you can increase it slightly by doing it 15 minutes morning and evening. Right now, we're also so personally, I have an old torn meniscus. I treat my meniscus daily, 10 to 15 minutes. If it flares up, I still play rugby and CrossFit, which my wife gives me a hard time about because there's probably less impactful things you could be doing with old knees and some gray hair going. But when it flares up, I do it twice a day. The other things that we've seen that have been very interesting from a cardiovascular standpoint is treating the large blood vessels in your neck. There's a Japanese team that's used this for systemic improvements in cardiovascular performance using what they call the proximal priority theory or therapy, excuse me. And so you treat your neck and then the base of your skull 15 minutes each a day. And then the other thing that I found extremely useful for me, and we're actually launching a separate product tomorrow for, is the gut health. And we see leaky gut dysbiosis. Diet has gotten, standard American diet is sad, and it's having a larger and larger impact on outcomes for people from an inflammation standpoint, where you have these tight junctions in your gut like open, and you start seeing more and more inflammation come out of the gut into the body. When you can treat the gut for about 15 minutes a day, the impacts on both brain chemistry, but the two biggest impacts we see are autoimmune disorders and just general immune health. So you get sick less, and autoimmune disorders, even powerful autoimmune disorders like asthma and multiple sclerosis, have shown very substantial benefits from treating the gut. And so we're launching a specific product for gut treatment that really has a powerful impact on the brain, the gut-brain axis being what it is, but also on immune and autoimmune health.
Nice. Excellent. Yeah, I'm going to get one of these for my knees because I have the same thing as you. I was a keen rugby player, playing seven-a-side, tore my right meniscus, and it's never quite been right ever since. I still run on it, quite like you. I have to go for a run, but I don't think road running is necessarily the best thing for my knees. But we do it because we love it, isn't it? So it's good to have something there that can help. That, like you said, I like the idea of not, because pharmaceuticals, as you said, NSAIDs, opioids, they're not tackling the underlying problem, particularly when it comes to joints. And so if we can look elsewhere for something that's overall improving our health, I think it's an excellent idea. Well, thank you very much for coming on for us. I'll let you crack on with the rest of your day. And what we'll do is we'll link at the bottom links to the website, the Instagram, so people can check it out and, like you said, do their own research and see how it interests them. Because for me, it sounds great. Brilliant.
That's fantastic. Really love it. Thanks for the great the discussion, Dr. Max. Hope you have
Pleasure.
a great rest of the day. Cheers.
You as well.